What's going on YouTube? It's TH back again with another video, and today I'm giving you a fatal flaw for all 16 NFC teams. Already did the AFC side. Be sure to go back and check that video out if you missed it, but hopefully you will enjoy today's video. If you do, be sure to hit that like button. It'll help me and my channel out a ton. Speaking of my channel, we're getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers. Help us get to that milestone by hitting that big red subscribe button down below. And of course, this is just a conversation being had. These are my fatal flaws. These are my reasons. I'd love to have yours. It's very subjective, so no wrong answers. Let me hear your fatal flaws for these NFC teams down below in the comment section. If your favorite teams in this video, let me hear what you think might hold them back. Anything you want to talk about, let's do it down below in the comment section. Very simple premise. I try not to be too simple, too right on the nose. Try not to be too quarterback heavy, but let's jump into it. Starting with the NFC East, the Cowboys, defensive regression. Again, this is kind of painting with a broad brush here, but specifically turnover margin and where it was last year. And Trevon Diggs has double-digit interceptions. That's going to be a tough feat to come back. Now, that being said, I even said it in my reason for optimism videos for the AFC and NFC. I think Trevon Diggs, there's a reason to believe he's just going to be better in coverage, right? Give up less big plays, give up less touchdowns, less yards, less catches, all that stuff. So it'll mitigate what he doesn't get and turnovers. But that being said, that is asking for a step forward with a step back, and that's not a guarantee. Also, you lose Randy Gregory, so what does that other edge rushing position look like, especially if you do want to move Micah Parsons and make him basically a full-time edge and he's your Randy Gregory replacement? Okay, well, what does that mean for the off-ball linebacker position? Maybe Jabril Cox is ready in year 2. Maybe LVE can stay healthy. Got him on a cheap one-year deal. Maybe. That's a lot of maybe. Also, what does that safety group looks like? That's always been an area of concern for me outside of Jaron Kearse, who's back with Dallas. So fascinating to see what Dan Quinn does with that defense, but you have to think with how good it was last year and how unexpectedly good they were, there's probably going to be a step backwards, especially considering defense is just so inconsistent year to year. So if they do take a step back, what does that mean for the rest of the team? You're already down Amari Cooper on the offensive side, some holes on the offensive line. The offense might take a step back. So with both sides of the ball getting worse, what does that mean for Dallas? So I'm focusing here on the defensive regression, specifically turnovers, and then that pass rush component. How many sacks can this team generate? I think both those areas might be in for some regression this upcoming year for the Cowboys. The Giants, the offense in general, this is so vague, but you draft Evan Neal with the number 5 overall pick, right? You sign, John Feliciano and Mark Lewinsky, solid. I still think you might be missing one interior offensive line piece there, but we'll find out. But all in all, I think it's safe to say the offensive line is probably going to be better than it was last year. We assume at least. So that's a step in the right direction for Daniel Jones. And Kenny Galladay's on the screen. I'm a big Kenny Galladay fan. I thought at $18 million a year, especially with where the receiver market's at now, I still look at that as like a potential team-friendly wide receiver contract. Now, he's going to have to find the end zone, right? Like, he's going to have to score some touchdowns to make it worth that money. But I have a hard time thinking Kenny Galladay is going to be as bad as he was last year. But what if he is, right? And, Kadarius Toney, is he going to be on the block? Is he going to be traded during camp? Is it Sterling Shepard? Is it Darius Slayton? What are these receivers being moved on from? You also draft Wan'Dale Robinson. So it feels like this team that has a lot of wide receivers in that room that I like and I'm interested by, but I don't know if they have a clear vision for who's going to be doing what. So that's concerning. But this, again, all comes back to Daniel Jones, right? Even if the offensive line's better, even if the wide receiver room's better, what is Daniel Jones going to look like? I think he was better, especially in those first, maybe 4 to 6 games last year than people want to give him credit for, especially with, the ecosystem around him. So I'm hopeful, not a Giants fan, but I am hopeful that he'll have a career year. He'll take another step forward and maybe make himself some money down the line. I'm rooting for all players, and Daniel Jones included. So hopefully he puts it all together. But we're talking about huge question marks here. We think the offensive line's better. We don't think the wide receiver room will be as bad as it was last year. And we think that amounts to Daniel Jones being better. Lots of if statements, lots of question marks. I'm interested in exclamation points. So, of course, that offense in general is a huge fatal flaw. And, the defense is imperfect in its own right. And that offense is suffering. The defense can be on the field that much more. And they're going to get, beaten to shreds, really. And, I love Wink Martindale. I think he's an awesome defensive mind. But his defense might be left out to dry, especially if, Brian Daboll and, Daniel Jones, they don't get that next step out of him in year 4. This could be a tough offense to watch. Kind of, maybe not as bad as it was with Mike Glennon towards the end of last year, but we could be seeing something similar. For the Eagles, so I'm a bigger Jalen Hurts supporter than most. Well, I liked him, the progression I saw from Oklahoma to Alabama, or excuse me, other way around, Alabama to Oklahoma, and then from Oklahoma to the last 4 games of his rookie year, and then even those last 4 games to what we saw last year. I've just seen continued progress, and I think there's still reason to believe he'll take, even if it's just another small step forward, he'll take one of those this upcoming year. When you add a wide receiver one like A.J. Brown, I would at least hope so, right? But that being said, what if he doesn't? What if he's just Jalen Hurts from last year, where he's pretty good with the football in his hands, and he's big part of the running game, and he's fine as a passer. He's passable. When you add an A.J. Brown, you really want to see that next step forward, but it's also going to be tricky because if he doesn't get any better and he's just kind of more of the same as last year, what are you going to do with that contract? What are his demands like? All that is interesting, but really for this team, I like the defense, and they've done enough to put enough talent on that side of the ball. And Jonathan Gannon plays a very conservative brand of football, soft zone, keeping the ball in front of you. He'll limit big plays. I like all that. The rushing attack was potent last year on the offensive side. Add another wide receiver. I want to see this team take a next step forward. And if you saw my way too early NFC East predictions, I kind of am expecting this team to take a step forward and be a dark horse. But Jalen Hurts could be what limits that, just because maybe he doesn't have unbelievable arm strength and arm talent in general. And he might not be the most accurate passer. And, maybe year 2, Nick Sirianni, maybe instead of him being better as a play caller and working with Jalen Hurts, maybe it regresses and the league kind of figures out what they're trying to do. So there might be a counter to what the Eagles were able to amount towards and build up to at the end of last season, especially, what was it, week 8? Week 9 on, where they started to piece it together. So maybe the league has its counter argument to that. So Jalen Hurts, obviously a big component, but I also like this roster a ton, so it's hard to find a fatal flaw. And if Jalen Hurts doesn't get better, that could hold this team back. So ergo, it's a fatal flaw. And then for the Commanders, this is an obvious one, like bad Carson Wentz. If we're getting throwing a pick out of the back of the end zone like he did against the Titans last year for the Indianapolis Colts, yeah, that's gonna be tough. And I think Washington's a spot where that team can mitigate the damage that Carson Wentz and some of his poor decisions can make, because that defense on paper is so talented, and I think it can be better than it was last year. But that being said, you'd rather not have to force your defense to bail you out. So if Carson Wentz, doesn't take that Scott Turner offense, which I think Scott Turner does a lot of things right, but what if he doesn't take to it? This is the team that runs a lot of RPOs. So there's a lot of decisions being made by Carson Wentz, and he did a lot of that both in Philadelphia, also a little bit last year in Indianapolis. But the more pressure, the more decisions you put on his plate, you're increasing the chances of him making a poor decision. So obviously, I hope the best. Like I said, I hope the best for all players, and I'm rooting for them all. So I'm hoping Carson Wentz kind of puts it all together, and maybe that the amount of RPOs is exactly what he needs to get back to MVP form. Maybe. Yeah, it's Terry McLaurin, and I like De'Ami Brown, and Curtis Samuel if he's healthy is a nice piece in there as well. Logan Thomas is a solid tight end. There's pieces. It just comes down to the decision making, and especially with the NFC East so up and down, and feels like any given year really anybody can win that division. Couple of turnover heavy games from Carson Wentz might be what holds this team away from a division crown and maybe the playoffs all in general. So let's move on to the NFC South. So the Falcons are going to be a team that's probably vying for the number 1 overall pick next year. There's a lot of flaws with that roster, but for me it's the pass rush. I love AJ Terrell. I think Casey Hayward's a really solid cornerback too. I'm kind of interested to see what that defense looks like, because a lot of his success comes from playing in that cover 3 Gus Bradley look. So are we going to see that this year? What does that mean for AJ Terrell? But Terrell's a stud. Literally, you can go to Pro Football Focus. He was a top 10 corner in man and zone coverage. So I'm not worried about that guy. He's a blooming superstar in my eyes. But to make their job easier, you got to get some pass rush. So I appreciate them putting emphasis on drafting Arnold Abichetti in the second round and D'Angelo Malone later on, I think in day 2, maybe even on day 3. I think that was a solid pick. And you're trying to address an area where you have to get better. That's 2 rookies, and then Grady Jarrett's a stud. He's there in the middle, but for a while now, we've seen Grady Jarrett and who else? And that's led to this pass rush just being abysmal. And it's led to, despite how good AJ Terrell is, that secondary being pulled apart. So, I like the investment they put in there. I think Terrell's going to be going to continue to get better over the course of his career. Casey Hayward's a solid CB2. I think Richie Grant in year 2 coming out of UCF could take a step forward as well. But if that pass rush is non-existent, there's just not much those guys are able to do. So it's got to be the pass rush. And this kind of goes hand in hand too. The offense might struggle, right? I'm kind of interested to see what those wide receivers and how that, bully ball system might look like. And is it Marcus Mariota, is it Desmond Ridder, whatever. But if that pass rush is non-existent and that secondary is getting torn apart because of it, makes that much more of the job the offense has to come through. So much more pressure on them. They have to be able to keep up, and then that's probably where I can see that being the undoing for the Falcons, and them kind of taking the path of potentially picking in the top 5 next year. In my opinion, probably going to be picking in the top 5 next year. So time will tell, but that pass rush definitely concerns me, especially if Arnold Ebiketie and D'Angelo Williams don't hit the ground running. Panthers, here we go. I haven't had the chance to talk about this yet, but the quarterback position, right? So I haven't gotten the chance to talk about this Baker Mayfield deal. Felt like this was one of the best real outcomes for Carolina, barring if they got a Deshaun Watson or something like that. But as the offseason progressed, this felt like one of the better options that they had on their plate. Cleveland's going to eat some of the salary, only cost you a 5th-round pick. You compare that to the 2, 4, and 6 you gave up for Darnold. One deal looks a lot better than the other. It's still not perfect. Baker is better than Sam Darnold, and it's one of those things where their lows are about the same, but Baker's highs are so much higher. I mean, unbelievable. Not even in the same universe, really. So it depends on what Baker Mayfield you get. And let me also say this: angry Baker, not petty Baker. We've seen petty Baker and him trying to ignite some fuel under his ass, and it's worked to limited success. It's had some moments. He's mad now, and this feels like one of those guys, if you give him a chip on his shoulder, he will make you pay. So this could be one of the best things that's ever happened in Carolina, at least during the Matt Rule era, right? Where you got a pissed off quarterback and he's ready to light, scorched earth. Maybe. And he does have, DJ Moore, and he does have Robbie Anderson, and, Tommy Tremble can make things happen after the catch, and Christian McCaffrey's as dynamic as it gets. But Ben McAdoo is your offensive coordinator. I'm concerned about that means for Baker. He was like QB6, when he's been asked about it, but also he's just not one of these offensive minds you look at and you're like, that guy's changing the way we look at offense, and he's on to something. He's just kind of, I don't want to say a relic of the past, but kind of a relic of the past. So this is going to be interesting, but this team's season is going to be dictated by the quarterback play. You have to assume it's not going to be Sam Darnold. It's going to be Baker Mayfield, and if they turn it over to anybody, it's going to be Matt Corral at some point. That's just the way I think it has to play out. That's just my opinion. But if this team can get, even if it's just league average play from Baker Mayfield, this team is so much better than it was last year on the offensive side. And it's a team with a good defense. But if Baker is what we saw last year and, cautious in the pocket, not wanting to make throws, kind of second-guessing every decision he makes, then ultimately picking the wrong decision, overthinking it so much that he picks the absolute worst thing to do in that situation and leads to turnovers, not going to be bad. Or if it's Sam Darnold for some reason trotting out there, that will be bad. In subjecting Matt Corral to NFL games where he might not be ready, right? That could be really bad. So this is going to be such a wide variance situation where either Baker could be really, really good and this team could surprise and maybe turn some heads, or it's going to be more of the same. They'll struggle. The offense will be, disappointing, to say the least, and it'll leave the defense out to dry. So, obviously, a potential huge fatal flaw there. And for the Saints, this is one of those teams where, the roster looks really solid. There's not a lot of holes, but there's also not a lot of depth. So, I put Demario Davis in this picture for an example. If Demario Davis gets hurt, what does that off-ball linebacking group look like, right? You took Pete Warner day 2 yesterday, last year's draft. But is he going to be Demario Davis? Probably not. So if he gets hurt, what does that look like? If Marshawn Lattimore gets hurt, how big of a blow is that to the quarterback position, right? Marcus May gets hurt, or Tyrann Mathieu gets hurt. That's a huge hole in your secondary. Pass rush. What if Cam Jordan goes down? You still got Marcus Davenport, but him and who else? So even on the offensive side, right? Obviously, if Jameis Winston gets hurt, that's a big, big concern. If Ryan Ramczyk gets hurt, you're talking about a rookie left tackle potentially, or James Hurst, and then whoever's playing on the right side, which realistically, if Ramczyk gets hurt, it's probably Trevor Penning on the left side and James Hurst on the right. That doesn't sound as good as it once, with what you once had with Teron Armstead and Ryan Ramczyk, obviously. So this team, on paper, you look at their roster, you look at their starters, and you're like, this team could be scary. This team could be legit. But they're an injury or two away from being, whatever. They're going to finish below 500. So lack of depth is really what I'm really concerned about when it comes to the Saints. But if they can stay healthy, and it's, the starting 11 on both sides, this team could be really, really good. Then for the Bucs, it's pass rush. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, he's going to be a starter this year. No JPP back. He's got to step up. Him and Shaq Barrett were both kind of quiet, especially after maybe some good games to start last year. That pass rush got quiet pretty quick, which, the Bucs were winning games, so you don't really hear a lot of people talking about it, but that pass rush wasn't what it was the year they won the Super Bowl. And, it's easy to point to 1,000 different things to why you didn't win a Super Bowl. One year your pass rush is really, really good. You win a Super Bowl. The next year it takes a step back and you don't. It may not be causation, but there's some correlation there. So can Joe Tryon-Shoyinka in year 2 take that step forward? And if he does that help Shaq Barrett get back to his highs that year the team won the Super Bowl, especially in the second half of that season? Also, Vita Vea is a component of that. A handful of times a game, he'll just put the center in a quarterback's lap, and maybe he can find a way to do that a couple more times a game, or pick those moments right. Or maybe if it's just more production on the outside, makes his life easier on the inside because the attention has to be diverted to Tryon-Shoyinka and Shaq Barrett. I'm speaking hypotheticals here, but also I think a good addition to this group is Akeem Hicks, right? He's your Ndamukong Suh replacement, and he'll play the run as good as Suh has over the past couple of years, probably maybe even better because Hicks is still a stud there, but he does add more pass rush than what we've seen from Ndamukong Suh. At least as a whole, Suh was great in that playoff game against the Rams last year, so I don't want to take that away from him. He can still turn it on in big moments. I think Akeem Hicks gives you more. On a 17-game sample, he'll give you more in the pass rush department than an Ndamukong Suh would. So if that pass rush can return to form, this team, obviously one of the best rosters in the NFL, and can certainly be in the Super Bowl again. On to the NFC West, this is such a generic one. I'm sorry, Cardinals fans, but bad finishes, especially when you bake in the fact that you're not going to have DeAndre Hopkins for the first 6 games, it might be a slow start. And if you have a troubled start, and then, more of the same we've seen over the last couple of years with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, where it's a disappointing finish to the year, you're probably not even getting to a situation. This picture was taken in the NFC wildcard game last year. If it's a troubled start and a bad finish to the regular season, you're not sniffing the playoffs. So it's a roster with holes, and I could look at the secondary as an area of concern, but I had that problem with the roster last year. But the pass rush was good enough, and ton of credit to that coaching staff. They did enough to keep that defense actually is one of the better whole units in the NFL last year. So I could be wrong once again, and I'm totally prepared to be wrong. So moving away from that, I think there's something that happens like from week 12 onward for this team the last couple of years. Things fall apart. I don't know if that's a lack of leadership. During this whole Kyler Murray situation, there's been, the reports, how true they might be. I have no idea that, Kyler Murray is, not necessarily the, front of the room leader. He's more of a pouter. How does that, affect this situation? I'm not there, so I can't speak to that. But if this team, week 10 onward, week 12 onward, whatever it is more the same the last couple of years, I can't see this team making the playoffs. So they're going to need to start out hot, even without DeAndre Hopkins being there. And then I think it's going to take his return week 7 to be that reinforcement of sorts, and maybe him to be that leader and to kind of carry this team forward in a positive direction, maybe getting back into the playoffs. So that second half of the year is going to be huge to dictate where this team is going to go. Then we get to the Rams, the offensive line. Joseph Noteboom is replacing Andrew Whitworth. In my opinion, Whitworth's a future Hall of Famer. So lose a future Hall of Famer, replace him with a guy who hasn't played all that much, always going to be a concern. Noteboom did look good last year, though, so that's an encouraging note. But even, like Brian Allen, what does that interior of the offensive line look like? And really, I go back to the Sean McVay, the one year they were close to finish 500. It was 2019, I believe. They went 9-7. And that was a year where, if you look at Pro Football Focus grading, their offensive line was the worst of any Sean McVay year in LA. So there's some correlation again there, where if the offensive line isn't up to snuff, that makes that offense's job so much harder to operate at a high level. Like, that's such simple thinking, but it was the case that year, and that was the worst year of Sean McVay's tenure so far with the Rams. And you lose an Andrew Whitworth. There's, it's pretty thin. You're starting, your first selection this past year's draft was in the 100s. That's when you're starting guards, Logan Bruss. So there's a pathway for that offensive line to take a big step back. And if it does, that might derail the offense on a pretty significant level. So that obviously, huge fatal flaw there for the defending Super Bowl champs. And then for the 49ers QB position, I also said, in my reason for optimism video, Trey Lance's potential, because that's undeniable. Arm, mobility, be able to push the ball down the field, everything. Trey Lance could be able to do a lot of things that Jimmy Garoppolo just can't, because he just doesn't have those same, God-given gifts. But this is going to be weird, especially if they keep Jimmy Garoppolo. This could be kind of like, in the AFC video I talked about, what does the Jesse Bates situation do for the Bengals locker room? If Jimmy Garoppolo's on the roster, but they're starting Trey Lance, and he struggles for the first 4 games. How quick before we start hearing reports that players want Jimmy Garoppolo out there, where they're ready to win? They don't want to worry about the young quarterback who has the unlimited upside. They're worried about the here and the now, and Jimmy Garoppolo is better here and now. But even if Jimmy Garoppolo's gone, You might see something like that. What if the 49ers are out 1-3 and Trey Lance is struggling? You might get some reports and things coming out of that locker room saying, I wish we didn't get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo. So this feels like a QB controversy waiting to happen, and all it needs is just a match to be thrown in the dynamite. So obviously a delicate situation. I wish I was a fly on the wall of that room. I'd love to hear the conversations John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan are having about this, and what they're trying to do with Jimmy Garoppolo and their actual feelings about Trey Lance. I'd love to hear all that, but I don't have that. So this is going to be fascinating. Of course, this is going to dictate, and it could cause more controversy. So as much as the QB position in and of itself dictates so much of how good of a team you are, the controversy and how that lingers and it affects the locker room and just the overall complexion, how we view this team and team morale, that could also have a huge, huge effect on this team this year. And then for the Seahawks, I had to put two here because right now their starting quarterback is either Geno Smith or Drew Lock, and that's bad. So I have to acknowledge that quarterback position is a huge fatal flaw. But moving away from, Captain Obvious saying the quarterback position is bad in Seattle, that corner room is rough, man. Like, Sidney Jones is probably their corner one. And if that's the statement, that is bad. I'm sorry, that is bad. Like, you look at the other cornerback positions, Malcolm Butler's the best cornerback in New England. I'm concerned about that. I guess Levi Wallace is cornerback one in Pittsburgh. That's bad. Sidney Jones in Seattle might be I don't know. That's up for debate. Tangent aside, cornerbacks specific, they do have the gift of Jamal Adams playing at his best, one of the best safeties in the league, and Quandre Diggs is an awesome deep coverage safety. So if they're going to run more of that traditional Seattle cover 3, I think that's a great fit. But even if they're transitioning more too high and cover 4, those two guys over the middle of the field, that would be great. That cornerback room, though, could be picked to shred. So I expect this team to kind of transition. They'll be playing a lot more zone and try to limit the weaknesses of a Sidney Jones and crew. But there's only so much you can do. And eventually, I use this example all the time when talking about the Jets and why I thought they needed to get a corner in the draft. It was like week 16, Jets, Dolphins, Devontae Parker beats Bryce Hall on a slant, 3rd and goal. I don't care if you're a zone-heavy team. Eventually, you're going to have to play man-to-man. Eventually, you're going to need your guy to stop the ball from getting the guy across from him. And I don't think Seattle has a guy like that on their roster right now. I could be wrong. Maybe Sidney Jones, he's still in his mid-20s. Maybe he takes a step forward. But right now, they are missing that guy. Okay, last division to talk about, the NFC North. So, again, vague, pretty obvious. Everything on the offensive side around Justin Fields in year one with Matt Eberflus in his first offseason. The emphasis, and Ryan Poles as well as the GM, emphasis was really kind of repairing up that defense, and you move on from Khalil Mack. That's going to take a step back. They might trade Robert Quinn as well, but really the secondary, right? You draft a Fuller coming out of Washington. You add a Jaquan Brisker coming out of Penn State. So now you have a nice safety tandem with Brisker and Eddie Jackson. And now I look at Jalen Johnson. Okay, if he can stay healthy, maybe he's their number one guy. And then you add Fuller coming out, or Kyler Gordon coming out of Washington. Excuse me if I said Fuller earlier. But Kyler Gordon, I think that's a nice add. And especially they're going to play a lot of cover 2. Those guys will be living in the flat. I think they'll be all right. That being said, they neglected the offense big time, and didn't necessarily have the resources because of all the trades they made last year. Draft capital was light. They traded away Khalil Mack. They might have to trade away Robert Quinn. Had to move on from Akeem Hicks to create cap space in the future. But they didn't have a whole lot of that this year. So that being said, the offensive line is still imperfect, and I'm still Larry Borum was okay last year. Tevin Jenkins is somebody I liked coming out of college. You hope he's ready to be a starter. You lose James Daniel on the interior, though, so question marks still arise there on the offensive line. And Darnell Mooney's a really fun player. I like Darnell Mooney. Downfield speed, guy's a big play waiting to happen. But he does feel like a nice, sprinkle in the mix. He's a nice, I like spicy food. He feels like the spice and that last little touch to the meal being prepared. But you still need the substance. You still need the actual meal itself. And no Allen Robinson there. They're obviously missing wide receiver 1. And if you're the team signing Byron Pringle and he's presumed to be a decent part of that mix, I'm concerned. And Velus Jones, they did draft a receiver in the 3rd round. I didn't like Velus Jones a whole lot. 25-year-old wide receiver. But even age aside, felt like a yards after the catch guy. And Justin Fields apparently liked him. Reports say that's great. I'll believe it when I see it, because right now I'm skeptical. So, is Darnell Mooney ready to be number 1 wide receiver on this team? He's going to have to be. He's going to get the most targets, right? But I just don't see him as the ideal person in that role. So I'm concerned about the wide receiver spot. Questions across the offensive line. And yeah, it's just first time offensive coordinator too. Luke Getsy coming from Green Bay. There's just a lot to be concerned about if you're a Bears fan around Justin Fields. And how does that stymie his growth and progression? Or man, the best case scenario is Justin Fields carries that offense to levels that has no business reaching, and then you can feel really confident about next year when you have more cap space and you have more draft capital. You could really put some nice weapons around him and then be able to see what that offense really can maximize, what its full potential might look like. For the Lions, Jared Goff, this is a team that's done a really nice job the last couple of off seasons. I've loved what they put together. Both, minimal free agency activity, but smart signings, low cost, or not breaking the bank. But the way they've drafted has been really, really smart. I think next offseason you'll see a little bit more activity in free agency, maybe bringing in some veterans who can help you win in the immediate future. But then also, obviously, the quarterback position is going to be a big part of that. We'll see. But I don't think Jared Goff is going to be the long-term future. And as this roster does improve, right, you add a Jameson Williams once he's out in the field. You're bringing a DJ Chark as well on a one-year contract. And year 2 of Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's great reason to believe that the supporting cast around Jared Goff will allow him to be better than he was last year. But he was still, 31st, I think, in Pro Football Focus, quarterback rankings last year. He was still a bottom-of-the-barrel starting quarterback. And because of that limited upside, this team is not going to be able to... I think they're building something, and I think they'll get there, but it won't happen this year because of Jared Goff, in my opinion. So there's still things this team can get improved. I think that cornerback position, Amani Oruwariye was really nice, 6 interceptions last year. I think Jeff Okudah can maybe not hit his full potential, but maybe become a league solid starting quarterback in the league. Hopefully, at least. The safeties are imperfect, but Jared Goff's going to be the biggest thing that holds this team back from maybe really surprise people in year 2 with Brad Holmes, the GM, and Dan Campbell as the head coach. Then for the Packers, I'm not saying anything you haven't heard before. The wide receiver room, right? And so Alan Lazard right now figures to be the number 1 target for Aaron Rodgers, but a big part of his strength in his game is run blocking. Robert Woods, you can say the same thing, but he does a little bit more on top of that. Alan Lazard, it feels like that run blocking ability is a larger share of what he brings to the table. And, Sammy Watkins, already some rumors that he might be a cut candidate. Christian Watson, intriguing prospect. The ceiling is there, but wasn't a guy I felt like was ready to contribute right away. I almost think Romeo Doubs could be a bigger part of the mix right away. But that wide receiver room, they're just going to need answers right now. And, it definitely helps. You have now back-to-back time MVP winner and 3 times overall in Aaron Rodgers. He's one of the best that's ever done it. So he will elevate that group, just like we've seen plenty of other great quarterbacks do with subpar wide receiver talent. But I think nowadays the emphasis is so large, and you're seeing teams make the trade for a Devontae Adams, make the trade for a Tyreek Hill, make the move for an AJ Brown, because the league is recognizing how important that position is. And I don't think that's just for average quarterbacks, if you want to call them that. I think that's for elite quarterbacks. And really my fear for the Packers is go back to that loss in the divisional round last year to the 49ers when San Francisco starts bracketing Devontae Adams and no one else can win. Now you don't even have Devontae Adams. So what does that mean for this passing attack in Green Bay? That is a huge part of their offense. Now they're getting more and more balanced. Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, they have the ability to run the football. But I feel like there's going to be Sundays where we watch the Packers and wide receivers can't get open. No one's separating. And they're making Aaron Rodgers work that much harder. And I think that might lead to his frustration. And I think that will lead to this offense maybe having to take a step back and need that defense to hit maybe the highest high that it's had during the Aaron Rodgers tenure, at least since back since 2010 when the team won the Super Bowl. Last team to talk about, the Minnesota Vikings. I am concerned about that cornerback room. Daniil Hunter, Zadarius Smith, can those guys stay healthy? If they do, that pass rush should be solid. The linebacking core, Eric Hendricks is getting older, yes, but he's still one of the best in the biz. The offensive line isn't, perfect, but they have taken strides and they have taken measures to improve that side or that part of the offense. The playmakers are there. Justin Jefferson's one of the best up-and-coming wide receivers. Adam Thielen, still a very good player. And I like KJ Osborne, especially if he's your 3. I think that's fine. Dalvin Cook, stud. And Kirk Cousins, especially in an offense with Kevin O'Connell, calling plays. Hopefully they just believe in him. It felt like Mike Zimmer and the Kubiaks, both the offense coordinators there during Kirk Cousins' majority of his time in Minnesota. It feels like sometimes they just feel hesitant to have him just open it up, let it go, let it fly. And, it's okay, 3rd and 10, we're going to run a draw here. Okay, no, take the check down. We're going to play it underneath. So hopefully there's just a little bit more trust in Kirk Cousins and hey, you got an awesome wide receiver who gets open down the field all the time. Justin Jefferson, go find him. He's down there somewhere. So I'm hoping that's the case. So pivoting back to my real fatal flaw here, the cornerback position, you do bring back Pat Pete, but So last year, Pat Pete is not the Pat Pete of old. I'm really hoping Cam Dantzler, maybe again, new coaching staff, some newfound belief in a young cornerback that has given you moments and some splashes, and maybe he's ready to take on a full-time starting role, and maybe he emerges as the best cornerback on the roster. And if he does, that is huge, especially with, you draft Lewis Cine very end of the first round, and then also Harrison Smith, still one of the best, safeties in football, though regressing, still one of the better ones. And Cameron Bynum was solid last year, some solid Pro Football Focus grades, so good, solid third safety there, which is becoming more and more prevalent across the league. It just comes down to that cornerback position and who can step up and be at least cornerback one. Maybe you feel better about Pat Pete if it's CB2 is the other guy on the other side of that number 2 assignment on the perimeter. But, man, is Cam Dantzler that guy? I don't know. I mean, considering how much of a defensive guru Mike Zimmer is and how much experience he has working with corners and secondary players in general, if he doesn't believe in Cam Dantzler, that's a pretty sizable red flag. Now, that might be, just older persons staying stuck in their ways. That's totally a possibility here. Or maybe he saw something that we haven't seen yet. And there was a reason why, hey, he's got moments, he's had flashes in the field, but he's not ready. Or he can't play on the outside. He can't play full-time. We'll find out this year, right? So that cornerback position, it's an offense I think will put up points. But that being said, they also need to get stops, and especially if Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith, one of or both those guys get hurt, that pass rush is going to take a huge step back, and those corners will be left out to dry, which is something we saw a fair amount of last year. So that quarterback position, I'm fascinated by how it plays out this year in Minnesota. But those are my 16 fatal flaws for the NFC teams. Tell me what you think down below in the comments section. Where was I right? Where was I wrong? Is your favorite team in this video? Tell me what you think might hold them back this upcoming regular season. Hopefully, you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. It would help me and my channel a ton, and help us get closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers by hitting that big red subscribe button down below. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.